Ruchita ma'am, can we start?
Yeah, definitely. So should I start directly?
No, I will be giving an introduction.
Okay.
Shweta.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shweta Joshi. I'm in the second year ESTC department, and I'll be co-hosting the coolest talk here with one of our coolest alumni. Uh, Kiti.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having myself, Hci Product. I am from the IT department. I this CSI stands for right. GCSI has organized events both in and post CSI was
AP, hello. AP, your voice is not audible. Can you check your mic?
yeah. Is it audible now?
Yes, AP, continue.
Yeah. So I'll start from the very beginning again. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Myself, Hci Solanki, and I'm from the IT department. I hold two positions at DJCSI, one of creators and editorial, respectively. So DJCSI stands for the Computer Society of India, affiliated to the Dwarkadas Jivanlal Sanghvi College of Engineering. Introduced in 2013, DJCSI has been instrumental in organizing innovative technical events for students both in and outside DJ. Code Shastra, which is DJCSI's brainchild, was Mumbai's first ever 24-hour hackathon, which has enjoyed monumental success year after year and continues to be an event of prestige and repute. We've been broadening our horizons and have been upping the ante every year. So much so that DJCSI earned the award of the best CSI chapter amongst all the student chapters in India for the year 2018-2019. I would hereupon like Shweta to carry forward.
Hello, everyone. I am Shweta, and I'll be co-hosting today. Our talk today is called PixelHacks, and we're going to be talking about UI and UX designing. But before I proceed, I'd like to give a quick introduction to Gdse, which is the official student chapter of Google Student Developer Club here at Gdse College of Engineering. We talk about all topics interesting, and to stay in touch, you can follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. We also have talks like these with a lot of cool people very frequently, and I'm sure you don't want to miss them out. So now for the coolest part of this talk is introducing our speaker for today, Miss Ruchita Parmar, an alumni pursuing MS in Human Computer and Interaction at Georgia Tech. And her portfolio posts were really creative and impressive internships around similar topics, UI, UX, user interfaces with IIT Bombay, Makers Asylum. And her currently, she's been working here at L1 and she's conducting evaluative research to improve the design of software solutions, which help small and medium sized business owners to process consumer payments. I'd now like for her to take over the talk and give us some really cool insights into this topic.
So,
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'd just like to say there's no need to call me ma'am. Makes me feel very weird, and I'm just like maybe a few years older than you all. So yeah, starting on that note, really excited to be here, and I'll see if I can share my screen and if everything works fine. Um, okay, so can everyone see the starting slide?
Yes, ma'am. It's purely visible.
Okay, great. Right, so l- yeah, so really excited to be here, and how we can take this is that I do have my co-hosts who are helping me moderate questions. So If you feel like asking questions, maybe ask them right there. And if something is pressing, I can answer it right away. And if there's something that you're asking right now, but I cover in future slides, I'll maybe tell you that this gets covered later. And if even then those questions don't get answered, we can always, get back to them at the end of the presentation. So yeah, with that, I think we can get started. So a few of the phases of this presentation will be first going over common HCI related terms, and then how to get started with HCI while you're in DJ Sangvi in whatever year that may be. And then if you decide that you want to pursue a master's degree in HCI, how would you go about doing that? Finally, what the career prospects of HCI are. And then I can talk a bit about my own journey about how I found HCI and what I have been doing right now. So let's talk about common HCI related terms, and especially because there is usually a lot of confusion and ambiguity around this, I would like to say that these definitions are by no means just the one definition. There is just constant change in what constitutes as what. So take it with a bit of pinch of salt. So human-computer interaction, firstly. This is a multidisciplinary field which focuses on the discovery and design of computer technology, basically looking at how humans interact with computers. And these can be any kind of computers. So try to imagine how in earlier systems, there used to be no graphical user interface. So there wasn't a screen, there wasn't menus and desktop and things like that, or for your cursor to move around. Everything happened from the command line. And then people came up with a GUI because a command line was more for experts and it was difficult for everyone to pick up. But you can even have your grandparents, you can teach them how to use your laptop using the graphical user interface, but it might be difficult for them to do that through a command line interface. So that's one example of where human computer interaction played a role in trying to make it easier for users to interact with the computer. Another example is the invention of the mouse itself. So there were pointing devices earlier, but they were a lot more difficult to work with. And even any sort of pointing device is itself an example of human computer interaction because they came up with this to be able to select things on the screen better. And again, this came when graphical user interfaces came into play. So again, an example of human computer interaction. And it does not always have to relate to screen-based interfaces. Even when you have voice user interfaces, so basically your Google Home or Alexa, you are the voice is the medium through which you're interacting with this device, like maybe an Echo Dot or something like that. So that also is human computer interaction. And there's just a bunch of examples all around us. Then there's human factors and ergonomics. So the essence here is looking at the psychological and also physiological, so the physical principles that go into designing products. So if we look at the design of a mouse, you probably may have heard of ergonomic mouse or mouse that are shaped differently so that they don't hurt your wrist or so that the fit is really good and things like that. So that comes into play when you take into account human factors. So looking at the size of the average size of a hand and what the shape is like and how you can design the mouse so that you can hold it comfortably without straining yourself. You can move it around. Needs to be heavy enough so that it's not too light and moves around constantly, but also not too heavy that it becomes exhausting to constantly move it around. So that's one example of human factors and ergonomics. Then there's user-centered design or what we call design thinking. So what is usually an issue with computer science students or engineering students is that we're so trained to directly jump to solutions that if we think of a problem, we directly start thinking of, oh, we should do this to solve it. But that is not the correct way to go about this. And that's what user-centered design tries to solve. The process starts at empathizing with the users. So if you have a problem statement, you try to understand more about what this problem is, who our users are, how can we refine the problem statement, and then we think of multiple ideas in the ideate stage. Then we prototype. So we basically, if we have 3 ideas that we have thought of, We will try to make really rough sketches or prototypes of all three. And then we go back to these users and ask them, which of these ideas do you think solves your problem the best, and things like that. And then you come again, and then if they say that, oh, I really like idea two is the one you'll go ahead and prototype further. And then you again go back to the user and say, okay, what do you think of idea two now that I have refined it? So there's this constant iterative. Iterative just means repetitive. It's like a cycle where you try to go through these phases again and again, trying to refine your solutions and make them better. And it has to start with the user. And since it has to start with the user, and most of the times we are not typical users, it's really important to think outside of what immediately comes to mind and not jump to solutions directly. So the next part is human-centered design. Over here in user-centered design, let's take the example of how Uber came about and they decided that they can sort of get people who want to drive people around and then others who can use these cars or then actually be driven around because they want to get to places. And this came about because they made sure that they understood their users, went through this entire phase, and tried to refine their ideas as much as they could to make a really good product, which became popular in no time. That is because they followed the user centered design process and made sure that everything was surrounding the user, what the user's needs are, what the user's pain points are. And that's why they have a really good product. Human-centered design is slightly broader than that, where we're not just thinking of what the user's problems are and how we can solve them in the best way, but we are also thinking about the society and the world as a whole. So, for example, like Uber, you also have Lyft. And what Lyft tried to do once is if you are trying to go to a destination, but your starting location also has maybe a train station around or a metro station close to it, they will suggest that, hey, there's a metro station close to you. Would you like to take that instead? And what they are doing here seems counterintuitive because they are actually making people not use their app or not use their service. But what they are trying to do here is because it's better for the environment for people to not use cars and use public transport modes instead. That's why they're trying to do something which is for the greater good. So the user is still in the picture, it's still user centered, but it's human centered. So it's a more humane design approach. Then there's UX. So user experience is what focuses on this entire journey that, again, if we take the example of an Uber, when you start out with the thought of wanting to go somewhere and then you open the app and they ask you for what your destination is, looking at these cabs, all of this is user experience. And it's not just looking at cabs, right? It's when you finally book one and then the waiting process. How do they inform you that this is how far the cab driver is, this is how long it will take for you to reach, and then when you even get to the cab, there are sometimes, I am not sure if this feature is there in India, but Uber, you have this feature where the driver will have a specific colored light shown on their car, just so that you can recognize that this is your car. So that's also a part of, making the user experience more delightful and just a lot more efficient and usable. So this entire process, again, now you get into the cab and then you go to your destination and then you get out, and then if it's in India, you maybe pay by cash or if you have paid in advance, and then you reach your destination. So this entire process from starting when you think that you want to book an Uber somewhere to how you go about this entire thing, and each of these steps that you take on the way constitute the user experience. And the goal of a good UX or user experience is that it should be really usable, it should be accessible. Accessibility could also mean how much is the availability of cabs in your area. If it's not that good, then your experience might not be that great because you can't really take an Uber if there's no Ubers around. And then again, delighting the users. So maybe the drivers have been trained to chat with you or play music if you like it or things like that. Again, trying to think of all possible ways in which they can enhance your user experience. Then there's user interface, and there's usually a lot of confusion around what UX is versus what UI is. And that is very, very important. It's like really, really important to not mistake the two for the same thing. There is intersection definitely, but they are definitely not the same thing. So when you see UX and UI written side by side, it sometimes people think it's the same thing, but it's not. So like we discussed, UX is this entire process from the start to the end. And then just a second. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if my camera was visible or not, and I just realized it isn't, but that's fine. I think it's disabled. Right. So the user interface is mostly pertaining to screens or the interfaces you are interacting with. So if we continue on with the Uber example, the part where you're thinking of going somewhere using an Uber, all that is user experience. But when you're on the app and you're actually looking at the screens that the designers at Uber have made, that's the UI, right? And again, the UI is designed in a way, or they try to design it in a way that it maximizes the usability of the app. It tries to, give you the best user experience. So again, these components are related, but user interface pertains a lot more to the visuals that we see, to the screens that we see. It can also include typography. So typography is basically what fonts they use. Then there's maybe the content. So, what sort of text do they write? Do they write, hey there, how are you doing today? Instead of writing, maybe welcome to Uber or something like that. What sort of conversation are they trying to build with you? It's all a part of the whole overall goal is to do a great user experience. And then there's UI elements to it. There's also motion design. Sometimes you'll see, if let's say you order something from Uber Eats, they have this animation where they show that the food is being cooked at the restaurant and then the car takes it and then it comes to you and things like that. They don't really have a functional purpose, right? But they they make you feel better about using the app. It just becomes more fun. It's like aesthetically pleasing to look at all these things. So user interface also helps does that. Again, there's a lot of controversy and ambiguity around what is UI versus UX, but I do think this example, at least according to me, makes sense. So if we're talking about a delicious cake, UI or the user interface is the icing, the plates, the flavor, the utensils, how is it presented? And then UX is the reason we're serving the cake in the first place. So why would people rather eat this cake than hamburgers? And that is the crux of problem solving and understanding the user's needs. So imagine that the user's needs are that it's a birthday party. And that is why we're serving cake in the first place and not hamburgers, because that would be odd. So again, UX goes at why are we solving this problem? Who are the users? How can we solve this problem in the best way possible? And then UI is sort of, okay, now that we know this is how we will solve the problem, let's make this, and then how can we make it or make it look the best possible? So are there any questions so far before we go to the next section? If anyone wants me to repeat any definitions, that's completely fine too, because I do think it's very difficult to understand this just because it's so ambiguous.
हा ना श्रीमानला विचारावं लागेल ते श्रीमानच्या स्ट्रीम मध्ये राहतं ना.
Okay. Right. So the host, please feel free to interrupt me if questions do come up.
I'll do that, but we haven't had any questions yet. But I'll let you
Okay,
know
sure.
if we do.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. So that being said, now let's go to how do we get started with HCI? So there is, I guess, a lot of flexibility in how you can go about this. Let's assume that we are here where we're doing our undergrad right now. And then maybe you're in your first year, second year, third year, wherever, and you decide that you like HCI and you want to do UI UX maybe, then you can start applying for jobs in UI UX. But maybe you decide that, no, I don't want to work directly after my bachelor's and I want to go to grad school. Grad school has two options. It could be a master's degree or it could be a PhD degree. You can also start with a master's and then go to a PhD, or you can directly do a PhD as well. And then after your master's, maybe you can do a job in UI UX. And even after PhD, you have an option where you can just stay in academia, be a professor, do research, or again, you can take up a job in UI UX. So let's focus on the first part right now, where you're in your undergrad and you're looking for a job in UI UX. So how would I get started at any stage? There's books that really, there's some books here that are really good when you want to start to understand the broader field. So I'm not talking about just UI UX, but HCI, how things are designed, how products are designed. And then the first book, for example, is not just about how digital products are designed, but very basic functions like doors. So how the handle of the door is should sort of give you an indication of how it should be opened. Is it supposed to be pulled? Is it supposed to be twisted? And things like that. There's another book called Don't Make Me Think, which is more about digital interfaces. Interaction design also broadly covers human-computer interaction. Then there's these two other books which talk about user research, which is something I will cover a bit in detail later, but these are some of my book recommendations. Then there's online courses. So Coursera has universities like UCSD, Georgia Tech, U Michigan. Google recently came up with a course on HCI. I think it's UX design, but that is really good as well for someone who's just starting out. There's some other websites. Medium has really good articles. There's YouTube videos and tutorials you can look at where people talk about their experience working in this field or doing a degree in HCI. There's also this podcast called Podcast from Google Design. That's also a really good starting point. It's really casual for anyone to understand without having background knowledge. There's also boot camps. Makers Asylum is this maker studio in Andheri where they do a yearly SDG school, which is sort of starting with a problem statement and then going about the entire process and then coming up with a solution. There's a winter school that IIIT Hyderabad holds, and that's also, I think both of these options are paid and they're short term, they're like a week or 10 days or something like that. But I think it's a good, rigorous experience. Personal projects. This is something you can start at any point after having done courses, before having done them, after you understand the process a bit better. These are just some example problem statements. You really don't have to have any additional resources to get started with these. It could be a local problem you want to solve, or it could be something you're really passionate about. So, for example, I really like reading books, but Goodreads is such an outdated platform. If you look at the app, it's really old and no one ends up using it just because of how it's designed. So how could I go about making it more engaging? These are problem statements you start with and then go through the entire process. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll cover a case study or two where we started with a problem statement and did all of the phases to come up with a solution. And that might give you a better idea about how you could also do something like that. Now, once you have done any or many of these things, it's time to start making your portfolio website. You want to put all your projects there. It's okay if you're from EXTC, it's okay if you're from mechanical engineering or whatever. Try to put whatever projects you have there, because to emphasize, HCI is an interdisciplinary field. So everyone really appreciates when they know that you have knowledge, just not in HCI, but also in some additional field. So don't feel like it's not relevant. Put whatever you can. But at the same time, you should try to highlight UX case studies. So, for example, if you have done any of these problem statements as a personal project, trying to write about that. And then also really emphasizing the entire process you went through. So again, when I give an example, this might be clearer, but it's really important to have a very thorough portfolio website. And how you should, again, justifying design decisions is something I can cover when we do a case study. And now, once this is done, it's time to build a network. So use LinkedIn to your advantage. Reach out to people at companies in roles that you want to go to, talk to them, ask them, how can you get to that role? It's really, really important to build these connections, because even if there is no job posting online, if you talk to people, they might tell you, hey, I do have an opening in my team. It's not posted yet, but maybe I could refer you, or maybe I could tell my team that you're interested. And this only happens when you reach out to them, you talk about your projects, you talk about your interests, your accomplishments, and they know that you're a good guy, good person, and they can vouch for your skills. That's when they'll give you referrals. Referrals, even when you're looking for a job in India, even if you're looking for a job abroad, they are really, really, really important. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, I don't see anything. Cool. So that was about if you want to do a job right after your bachelor's degree. This could also apply for internships. Again, it's the same process, even if you want to go for internships or for a full-time job. Now let's assume that you want to do a master's in HCI. So this is my route because I came for my master's directly after my undergrad. So I can speak to a bit more detail about this. So we're talking about the second section now where we're pursuing grad school. I think one important thing for you to realize is asking yourself, is grad school right for you? And it probably is if you realize that whatever you learned just by yourself in these 4 years of undergrad, I mean, there is no dedicated degree for HCI and DJ. So you realize that this isn't enough. I want to learn a lot more than what I could learn through online courses. Then yes, you should definitely go for a master's degree. It's really important for you to know that HCI, a degree in HCI goes beyond UI UX. UI UX is something we weren't even taught in the 2 years of our degree. It's something you always do on the side. HCI research is a lot more about research areas, which I'll cover briefly later, but it's not UI UX. So again, if you want to specialize and study this in depth, that's when you would want to do this degree. Other things to consider is finances. So the return of investment is really quick after you start working, but you should be able to support yourself while you're doing the degree. Then also important to consider that it gets really rigorous and stressful. So is that something you would want to do? Is something to consider. You get to experience diversity and working with different cultures, and that's something which is really important. So these are sort of non-academia related factors, but again, really important to consider this when deciding if you want to go for grad school. And again, the last point being there's broader scope and better career prospects and pay, which I will talk about briefly here. So companies abroad, mainly US, Canada, and Europe, because that's where most people go, they understand the need and value of UX roles and HCI a lot more than companies in India. That being said, it's not like India does not have these roles, but they are mostly at either design studios or bigger companies like you'll have Google, Microsoft, and places like that, those in Hyderabad or Bangalore, where you'll get these roles, but maybe not as much in smaller companies. Again, in terms of research, universities in India, even IITs, don't have as many professors or research labs in HCI, sadly. So if you want to pursue a degree, like a career in academia, there might not be as much options in India. I'm not saying there aren't at all. They are definitely growing. There's triple ITs who do really good HCI research. There's IDC, which is um, Indian Design College or something like that. It's in IIT Bombay. They also do really good work, but there's just so much more research in HCI in universities abroad. So at this point, if you have decided that you do want to do a master's degree or maybe even a PhD, these are some of the considerations you might want to take when deciding which universities or programs to apply to. Academics is really important. So what the rankings are, what are the courses they offer. Sometimes you are interested in a particular professor because he does really good research. So it could be that research areas. So I am mentioning robotics, IoT, AI, data visualization, but this is in context of HCI. So just to reemphasize that when you do research in a university, it's not just about UI UX. You're probably doing human robot interaction, which means that if you're designing a robot, how would the UI be? What would the user experience be when this is a consumer robot and people are buying it and taking it to their homes and playing with it or it's functioning? IoT could be smart devices. How would the UI UX be for that? There's human AI interaction. which is mainly now that you have so many AI or machine learning software, how do you go about making users understand how they work or how they're supposed to interact with it, or how do you design novel ways for them to interact with it? Could also be data visualization. These are just some examples of research areas that intersect with HCI. So again, it's not just UI UX when you do a master's degree in HCI. Again, career opportunities is really important. The duration. So number of semesters that a program is for. Shorter programs are a lot more hectic and they give you much lesser time to look for jobs, and it does take time to find the job. So doing a 1 year program versus you might be better off doing a 2 year program just because it gives you more time to also look for a job and also explore what you want to do or what your interests are, because there's just so many research areas, right, or so many job opportunities. You want to know where your interests lie, because HCI itself is also a very broad field. Then funding is important, so realizing if there's funded positions, and then location. So some universities are located in really secluded areas where it's just the university and it's outside of the city, which might not be the best option for you if you are someone who really likes the city life. So considering things like that. The first three are the top three programs in the US for HCI. And then there's also these three, which are not the top three, but they are really good programs as well. And then there's a link here to a spreadsheet that I had created with whatever research I had done about universities that offer HCI degrees or related degrees. So that's something you can look at when we later share these slides. Okay, so now let's talk about career prospects of HCI. At this stage, I think you have a much better idea about what HCI or UI UX would be. Now, sort of formalizing who might be interested in it. So if you feel like you are out of place or you feel like a misfit in your current field, it could be engineering, it could be psychology, it could be finance, architecture, anything. There's all sorts of people with all sorts of background that come into HCI. And then again, emphasizes the second point, which is because it's an interdisciplinary field, there is just a mix of so many different types of people. If you don't like coding, even if you're in CS, even if you're not, but you are scared of coding, and but you still want to stay in the tech field or STEM, staying in the STEM field is sort of important when you go for a master's degree, because that's when you get a 3 year visa, work visa, instead of just a 1 year work visa, or basically just the ability to work for 1 year after your degree instead of working for 3 years. So that's something people consider. And HCI really helps with that because it's a STEM degree, but you could go about your entire career in HCI without ever having to code if you choose to. Again, you want to contribute more to the direction that the products or software design takes. So if you're working at Uber, again, if you are a software developer or an engineer at Uber, you will you will develop the app or you will implement it. But if you're a designer, then you will, talk to users and find out that, okay, this is a feature we should come up with. For example, when Uber is in the US, you have this credit card payment, which is already paid even before you enter or take the ride. Versus when they use the same model in India, they realized that people weren't using Uber as much. And that was because in India, cash payments are just so much more popular. So that's why Uber decided that, okay, now they're going to adapt a cash model here just because that will work better in India. So again, wanting to contribute more to the direction the product takes or how you can expand it, all that is something that a career in UI UX would help you do. If you like to interact with people, listen to their concerns and pain points, this is something UX researchers do. We're going to get to that soon. And again, if you're here in this seminar, you are probably already interested. So I hope that I can help you with whatever decision you want to take. So what are some of the skills and tools? I would really like to emphasize skills here because I believe that tools are something that you can always learn at any point. Skills, or is this what you want to do, is a lot more important. So problem solving skills. There is problem solving in HCI and UI UX, but it's different from the kind of problem solving you would do in, let's say, competitive coding or lead code, or if you are a developer, because they are a lot more mathematical problem with a final answer. You know when your code is working and you're getting the correct output. But here, the problems are very open-ended. So, for example, when Uber thought that they want to come up with a ride-sharing platform, or they want to solve the problem that people have getting from one place to another, that was the problem they had, and they came up with this solution. But it's still so open-ended. There's no right or wrong answers. There's just you trying to do the best you can. So that's something that's important, wanting to solve open-ended problems. Storytelling, communication, persuasion skills are also very important, mainly because, like I said, companies in India don't understand the value of UX yet. That's also true a lot of times for companies in America. And also within each company, there's teams where a lot of times developers or engineers or the marketing or sales team, they just don't understand the value of doing proper UX work to build a very strong foundation for whatever the product is. So it's really important for you to have an, the ability to convince them by telling really good stories about the entire process and persuading them that this is something that needs to be done and it needs to be done correctly. And then patience for executing multiple iterations. So like I said, it's an iterative process. You constantly have to keep going back to redesigning, taking it to the user, taking their feedback, and then going back and making it better, now going back again, and you're constantly iterating. And sometimes it needs patience to keep redesigning the same thing over and again. These are some of the tools. They are not really difficult to master. So I'm not going to go a lot over them, but they're just here for you to see. So career prospects. In a team of 5 people, there's a chance that one person will be a UX designer and 4 other people will be engineers, so software developers or front-end engineers. And with this ratio, UX roles are fewer than SD roles, which leads to more competition in finding a good position or a job for you. Because many companies also prefer hiring those with industry experience over fresh grads. If they are hiring many fresh grads in an SD role, they can afford to take people who have limited experience. But if out of these 5 people, only one of them is going to be in a UX role, they want that person to come with industry experience so that they can get started immediately. One really important thing to remember for people who come in from India is that there will be no campus placements the way it works in Indian universities, where companies come, take your full day interview on the very same day and hire you. There is no such concept in the US. So it's all you trying to do your own work, applying online, reaching out to people and everything like that. I am not going to lie and say that it's very easy. It is definitely a struggle and it does take time to find the first job. But then again, it's a fine balance between what you're willing to do for something you're passionate about or interested in and finding a job that you really like working at. And just having this genuine passion and interest in the field takes you a long way, because it keeps you motivated to continue looking for jobs. Okay, so some of the common jobs. Now we're talking more about the um, industry titles that someone in HCI works with. So far, it was more about the academic side of things. So UX researcher. UX researcher is someone who is in the very early stage. So this is the person who will interview users and find out what their needs are, what their pain points are. They will come up with insights. And this is what happens during the initial stages. And then in the later stage, when the UX designer has come up with some designs for the app or what the app will look like, they'll go take these designs to the user and ask them, what do you think about this? How would you go about doing this task on this app and things like that? So that's something a UX researcher does. Common backgrounds for someone in this role are psychology, just because they really need to understand what is going on in the user's mind. But there's also HCI also is a very valid background to have if you want to become a UX researcher. Then there's UX designer and also product designer. A product designer is so a UX designer is sort of a subset of a product designer, and this is the person who concentrates on solving the problem with whatever insights they have gotten from the UX researcher. And then they will come up with a lot of ideas, design them, prototype them, and then once these designs are ready, they can pass them on back to the user researcher now, who will go to the users, get their thoughts on it, and give them back to the designer. So now the designer knows, okay, these are the improvements I need to make to this design so that it's better. And also at the same time, since it's an industry role, the UX designer needs to balance what the users' needs are, but also balance what the business's needs are. Because at the end of the day, the business wants to make revenue and make profit. So a UX designer tries to balance this. And that is what sort of a product designer is. So while a lot of times a UX designer might just concentrate on the design and prototyping part, a product designer tries to see it more holistically about how this product works in the business. So if someone at Google is working on Gmail, the product designer will try to think of how Gmail interacts with other related Google software. So there's Google Drive, there's Gdocs, how you can have features in Gdocs that directly, there's this feature in Google Doc where you can directly share that Google Doc in an existing email that you might have. So, trying to think of the broader point of view of how different products in the ecosystem connect. That's something a product designer would also do additionally. Then there's UX engineer. So now let's say the UX designer has finalized these designs and there's good enough feedback from the user research or from whatever interviews they did. Now the engineer will use these designs. The designs are usually interactive prototypes. So they are clickable, but they don't have a backend. So they're not developed, but they are just images which are clickable. The UX engineer will take these prototypes and wireframes and then use front-end coding to develop them. So again, UX engineer still is trying to think of how we can improve the user experience and make it the best possible. But their job is mainly around front-end coding and not as much around ideation or what the user researcher did. Then there's product manager. So product manager is not exactly a design heavy role. They do a lot more managing, but at the same time trying to think of how different products interact and also how different team members interact. So he will make sure that the user researcher, UX researcher is working well with the UX designer. They are coordinating well with the UX engineer. The product manager decides what the scope of a product will be, what additional features we should have, basically coordinating a lot of things. But at the same time, they might also sometimes get to designing, more often than not, though. So these are some of the common roles. There's also a UX writer, which is basically, like I mentioned previously on Uber, if it says, hey there, it's a sunny day, do you want to go somewhere today? Just to sort of, persuade you to take an Uber ride or something like that. So that's the job of the UX writer, to make the text really appealing, to make it really delightful and convincing. And again, everything starts with the UX because it's towards making a better user experience. So if you're someone who really likes creative writing, then UX writer might be a good position for you. But again, there's fewer roles for that, just because, like I said, that there's a lot more SDE roles than there's UX roles. And a lot of times what companies do is if they don't have enough resources, they will have the same person do UX research, quick and dirty UX research, and then do UX design. And then sometimes also they are expected to do UX engineering, and they're called UX generalists. So they are expected to do all of those things just because the company does not have enough resources to have a dedicated UX researcher, designer, engineer. And that is the reason UX writer roles might not be as common, but bigger companies do have dedicated roles for that. So okay, now since these are some of the roles there are, now what does the job application process look like? So like I said, there is a portfolio website that you need to have outlining your case studies and the process that you went through, which is it is a mandatory requirement for most design roles you will come across, and this is true for India as well as abroad. So this is something you have to do if you want a job in this field, irrespective of whether you do a master's or not. Then let's assume that you pass the screener round and now you have an interview. What interviews usually ask for is for you to present your case studies. So again, talk about the entire process, about how you did research, how you did design, and then how did you maybe did not develop the product, but just being able to present your case studies. There's sometimes also design challenges that come as a part of the job application. So they'll tell you, redesign the Uber app, and they say you need to do this within 24 hours. So the intention here is you don't have to come up with something very polished, but they're trying to understand how do you go about taking a problem statement, trying to uncover user needs, and how would you redesign it. But it does not have to be very polished. And this is also true for a week-long design challenge where they give you a problem statement and then they give you some time to, you they want to see how you manage your time, how you go through the entire process, each phase of the process, and then come up with something which is meaningful. So again, it's not something that has to look pretty, but it has to be something that solves the problem. Then during the interviews, you sometimes have whiteboard design challenges. So, for example, when applying for SDE roles, you have these coding challenges where they ask you to maybe make a linked list and you have to write a pseudocode for it right there during the interview in an hour or so. You have similar whiteboard design challenges where they'll give you a problem statement and you're expected to walk through your thought process. How do you go from the problem statement, make the correct assumptions, and then arrive at a solution, which is again something that solves the problem well. Um, a lot of times, these interviews are also about trying to understand how you work in teams and how you deal with ambiguities and constraints. So, what I mean by ambiguities and constraints is that a lot of times you have the engineering, so you come up with this really creative solution, but then the engineering side says this is not something we can implement. We don't have the bandwidth to, we don't have, it's just not feasible or practical to implement it. That's a technical constraint. How do you deal with it? So now how do you make your design, how do you refine your design so that it fits those constraints? Another constraint could be that you design something which is really good for the user, but it would mean that the user has to use this service less often, which means the business gets lesser revenue. So now this is a business constraint. And even though you want the best for the user, you sort of have to balance and find something where the business is still making revenue, but the user is also happy. So things like that, talking about how you would deal with constraints. Ambiguities is again, like I said, there's no right or wrong answers in this field just because the questions aren't that simple. So how do you deal with ambiguous situations where you could have taken two different routes and you have to decide based on limited information which of these two routes makes more sense or which design makes more sense? Working with cross-functional team members. So again, sometimes it becomes difficult to work with engineers because what they want to prioritize is the development or the coding portion of it. But you understand that even though this is easier to code or develop, it might not be the best option for the user. So how do you convince your engineering teammate that this makes more sense, or how do you arrive at a compromise which makes sense? So things like that. These are examples they will ask you to demonstrate during your interviews. A single most important thing for job applications to get a job is to network. It's so important. I cannot emphasize it enough. Most of the jobs I have seen people around me get, most of the jobs I have gotten have never been through directly applying on the website, but reaching out to people and them telling their teammates at that company that this person wants to apply and I think they would be a good fit. And that's when I get a call back from the recruiter saying, hey, we heard that this person said you're a good fit. Do you want to interview? So it's just, and especially abroad, it's the only way to really land a good job. So it's really important to network and just meet new people. And it's always nice to hear what their work is and how they go about it. Okay, so I will try to be very quick in my own journey through HCI. So yeah, I started my degree in DJ Sangvi in 2015 in CS. And in the first year, when we had common subjects, I actually really liked creative things and I loved engineering drawing a lot, which led me to exploring 3D modeling just because I really liked isometric views. And 3D modeling and animation got me an internship at IIT Bombay because I had talked to some professor there, which was actually a web development internship. After that, I somewhat got into creative coding and AI, just because, again, I was looking for something which was a good mix of CS, but also had an artistic side to it. And then I went to the summer school for deep learning in China. I think somewhere around this time, I started exploring UX boot camps. So CRI Paris is the one that I talked about, which is at Makers Asylum. Then there's also this other winter school at IIT Hyderabad. So this the last part actually happened in my third year when I was already too late when I realized that HCI is the field that I want to go to. But by this time, I was I was actually still uncertain about whether I want to do a master's in HCI or CS. So I applied to 5 CS schools with an HCI specialization, and I applied to 5 HCI programs. And then I got into Georgia Tech and decided to go ahead with it, even though it was a pure HCI program and not CS, just because it was so well ranked. At Georgia Tech, I started out with thinking I wanted to be a UX designer just because I thought it would be so much fun and really creative, and I like making things. But over time, I also realized that user research also sounds really interesting. So I tried to explore that as well. And I also did physical prototyping. So that's sort of like industrial design, but that's just something I really enjoyed. So I tried to explore that. What some of these are research methods which we just don't have time to go through. But one thing I'd like to emphasize is that accessibility and trying to make products usable for all sorts of people who might have one or the other kind of disability. It's really, really big and it's really, really important in countries outside of India. So I have had the chance to work with people who are blind, who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who are wheelchair users, or people who have some sort of cognitive impairment. And I've been able to talk to them and talk about what their issues are. Maybe we can go over a case study like that, but these are just examples from that. And even when it comes to design, we never have had to restrict ourselves to just designing phone apps or websites. We were also able to design tablet apps or voice user interfaces. We had the chance to work with an aquarium and also with a children's museum. So just trying to show you that HCI is not at all limited to just designing apps or websites. So this is an example of a physical prototyping project where we were designing a new kind of straw-based Lego set almost, where these straws had electronics embedded in it. So the straw that I'm touching is a touch-based straw. So as soon as I touch it, the straw connected to it detects that I am completing the circuit, and then the blue LED lights up. And we made an entire house with straws like these. So just an example of all these different kinds of research that you can do with HCI. Um, you probably won't ever get an industry role which will ask you to do something like this, but maybe you want to stay in academia and do a PhD or do in-depth research in such novel human-computer interaction techniques. And this could be an example of that. So a bit about my industry experience. I was a UX designer at a B2B SaaS startup. So B2B is business to business or enterprise products. So for example, the Gmail that you use is a consumer facing or B2C product where Google is the business and here's the customer and Gmail is the product. But Google also has an enterprise Gmail version. So if Google, so let's say for example, there is some small company which needs an email-based service, and their needs which needs an email-based service for their employees, and their needs are different than what a customer's needs will be. So Google has a different enterprise Gmail software for businesses. So I was a UX designer at a startup which also had a B2B product. And I was the only UX designer there. So I again had to do UX research as well, just because it was a very small startup, so a very small team. And right now I am a UX researcher at a medium-sized bank. So again, just trying to show that I did UX design, but I did not like working at that startup as much. So I decided that now I wanted to try how it was to be a UX researcher. So I'm doing that now. And something I have realized over time is that I did not like being a UX designer, mainly because I was expecting it to be like the academic projects that I had done at Georgia Tech. But I realized that industry work is a lot more focused and iterative. At Georgia Tech, you would start with a problem statement, do a project, and then just leave it there. But at that startup, this is the only product that they had. So I had to go back and keep iterating to make it better and better. And that's something I did not enjoy as much. So that's something to keep in mind, that academic HCI versus being a UX designer or UX researcher is probably a lot more different than you expected. And for the same reason, there's a creative exploration you can do due to technical or business constraints, like I previously mentioned. But in an academic project, you just have the complete freedom to design anything, just because you don't really have to develop it or do some sort of proof of concept. So just something to remember when just so that you have clearer expectations about what a job in UX consists of. And again, like I said, that since I do not like being a UX designer, I thought I'd give being UX researcher a try. So it's okay if you don't enjoy what you're doing. You can always try something else. If you're doing a job right after undergrad, but you realize, okay, I'm done, I want to do something else now, then maybe go do a master's or do a PhD. So, you can do this at any stage in life. I had classmates who were 60 years old. So it's never too late to start a different thing. But it's also really important to remember that any profession you decide to pursue, there will always be a mix of fun and boring parts. So, not everything about your job is going to be interesting, but as long as you're passionate about what you're doing, I think that's just great. So, before we do a case study walkthrough, are there any questions? Because I realize I have taken an hour already. Okay. Okay, so how is UX research different from UX design? So Sangeet, I think when we cover a case study, it will be clearer. So I think if your question isn't answered, then we can come back to it. And then Vedant, yeah, popular universities where one can apply for masters without an undergrad degree in design. All of these universities have no set requirements about what they want your undergrad degree to be. You can come in from a design degree, you can come in from CS, mechanical engineering, whatever. It's about how you present your work, what you write in your SOP, about how you found HCI, why you want to do HCI. That's important. Um, that being said, like I said, if you want to do a master's in design instead of in HCI, that's a big decision to consider, just because a design degree is not a STEM degree. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, and design does not come in it. So when you come to the US, let's say on a student visa, you get to work only for a year on that student visa. People with a STEM degree get to work for 3 years. So that's something to consider. But a degree in design, a master's degree in design, is definitely valuable as well. A lot of times, companies prefer people who have a design degree instead of a master's degree if the role is very heavily visual design focused. So try to think of UI, where they don't want you to solve problems as much, but they want you to make the apps look really pretty and really appealing. So that's something to consider. Which internship sector involves HCI? Which okay, so if you're trying to ask what industry domains have UI UX, any and every product has to have a UI UX. So for example, I work at a bank right now, and the bank has apps, right? Those apps also have to have a UX person who is designing them, who is doing UX research, or who's asking those bank users what do they think about the app, what do they like or not like about the app, and then the UX designer will go and make this app better. So that's the banking industry. Then there's the medical industry. Doctors or even patients use these portals that they have on their computers where they put in important information about their patients or interact with the software. That's also where someone who is a UX person comes in and designs that. So just examples of basically every domain, or any company that has a product or service that has some sort of digital interface has to have a UX designer, UX researcher working on that. So it could be any domain. Now you have to decide what industry you are interested in, and then maybe look for internships there. Is that what the question was, Chinmay? Okay. So I think I can go over a case study. Um, okay. So for example, one of the problem statements, this is an academic project. One of the problem statements that we had was that we wanted to make a PT or a PE, physical education class, more accessible for children who are blind. And the first part, these are examples of different kinds of blindness errors. So this is how a person who has glaucoma would see the world, and this is how someone with cataract would see the world. So again, we're trying to understand the user better, empathize with them. All of this is what a UX researcher does. They are the ones who need to understand what the pain points of the user are. So first of all, we need to understand how is it to be blind and not to be able to see because you have some sort of visual impairment. So again, we did research on visual impairments. We did research on adaptive PE. So now the UX researcher will go and they will maybe observe a PE class happening and see. Maybe they'll observe a blind kid in a PE class and see what their issues are, what are they struggling with. And then what else we did is to in we talked to PE school teachers and asked them what their pain points are when they are trying to organize a PE class, and when if they have people in their class or kids in their class who are blind or who are partially blind, how do they fit into the class? What are their pain points and things like that. So we are directly talking to the user and trying to get as much information as we can to better understand the problem statement that we are trying to tackle. And again, the problem statement is we want to make a physical education class more accessible for visually impaired school children. So we did this, and then we talked to people who are blind themselves and asked them, what are the difficulties that you face when you're exercising, or when you're maybe, do you play some sports? If so, how do you go about playing that, considering that you're blind? What are your issues, or what are your pain points? Then we do competitive analysis. So again, looking at what are some existing solutions that are out there. So, for example, for blind kids to be able to play ball, they cut the ball, put bells in it, and then seal it again. So now the blind person does not have to see the ball, but they can hear it coming towards them. Blind people have a heightened sense of hearing as compared to us just because they don't have vision. And that really helps them place themselves or, find things around them and things like that. So again, all of this is UX research. We are just trying to understand what the user is doing, what are they going through, what their pain points are. Now, all of these sticky notes are findings that we had. So from different user interviews, from different observations, from this competitive analysis that we did, from all of this research, we came up with all of these multiple findings. And now we try to organize them in different ways. So if two findings are similar, we put them together. And this is something we call an affinity map. And these are some of the top findings we came up with. A lot of times findings are repetitive, and repetitive findings also go in the same section. So these are some of the findings we got. So let's say when we interviewed the teacher, we found out that she said that my students and I decide activities on the go based on whatever resources are available. So now this is important to us because we need to make sure that we design a solution where we're taking into account what available resources the teacher already has and how can we build a solution around that. So, and then this is an important finding, right? I want my PE classes to be flexible enough to accommodate students with and without disabilities. People with disabilities should not be separated out, and they should be able to do PE with the other students, and the teacher should be able to manage all of this together. So these are just examples of insights or findings. Now, let's say at this stage, the UX researcher gives these findings to the UX designer. Again, this could be one or more UX designers. And now we come up with a lot of different ideas around these findings. So, what are some possible solutions that are something, that's a solution that works on the available resources that the teacher has? And you come up with a lot of different ideas. So each row over here on the image on the right hand side are different ideas that we had. Then you try to rate these ideas based on how practical they are, how creative they are, how well do they solve the user's problem. And then these are three different main ideas that we came up with. And I'm not going to go into the details of the ideas, but they're there for you to look at if you want to. But then after that, what we did is we again went back and talked to the users and asked them, okay, so which of these three ideas do you like the best? Which do you think is the most useful for you? And things like that. And then we decide one idea. So in this case, this idea is what came up from. This is a two-part idea where we're utilizing sound. So we saw in YouTube videos of blind football players that the coach taps on the soccer pole on both sides. And what happens is the player who's standing at the penalty kick spot, they hear the sound coming in from both sides, and then they are able to locate how far they are from the goal and how much distance there is between both the goal posts, and they are able to aim right in the middle of the goal. So we try to design a headset which the blind student will wear, and they will ask, where is the left goal post? And there'll be distance sensors on the goal post. So right here, the sensor one, sensor two, which will sort of calibrate these distances and make a beeping sound coming from either the left end or the right end, so that this kid is able to understand where exactly or how far is the sound coming from, and then able to do a penalty kick. So this is an example of how the distance sensor would be embedded on the goal post. And this is just some hardware work. And then there is an iPad based UIs. Again, this is user interface design. How can we make the most usable interface for that? So now this is for the teacher to
Rachita,
put these different sensors. Yeah,
I'm really sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to
no
check if
problem.
you're sharing the correct slide. Is this still on the case study workspace?
Oh my God, I'm not. Oh, okay, I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay, right. This is just a tab. I'm so sorry. Um, okay, right. So this is the interface I'm talking about. I'm so sorry. I'll just very quickly go through whatever I talked about. So these are the different kinds of blindness there are. And then this is all of the research that we did. So this was again talking to users and things like that. These are the findings that we came up with. These are the different ideas that we rated based on how practical or creative they are. And these are the top three ideas that we came up with. So at this stage, they are just sketches, but then we went to the users and asked them, what do you think of these ideas? And then finalized an idea. And this is the goalpost that I'm talking about. So these two red ones are distance sensors, and these are headsets. So based on the distance sensors and the sound they make in the headphone that the user is wearing, they're able to sort of understand how far away is the sound coming from and then aim their goal. And this is the hardware example of the distance sensor. And this is the user interface or the tablet based interface that the teacher will use to set up these distance sensors and sort of make sure that the blind students are able to hear where the sound is coming from. So then again goes back to user research where we tested with different people how our interface works. Then we also tested with a blind student. So we had headsets, and then we tried to simulate the sound and see if she would be able to kick a goal just based on that. So an example of an Hci product, it has UX UI elements. Again, this sort of project might not be possible at an industry level just because most industry projects don't have capabilities to do hardware products just because they are so expensive and cannot be spread widely. But just an example of an academic project. This is a very, okay. So yeah, this was one example. This is uh, another problem statement. I won't go over all of this, but let's say that you get a problem statement that says your school wants to provide dedicated spaces for students to help them focus on their studies. So how would you design an experience? So realize that they are asking design an experience. They're not saying design a phone app or a website, because you're the one who's supposed to decide what is the best way to solve this problem where students want to focus on their academic studies by using a dedicated space on campus? Then you will go about deciding what you want to do. So this is basically what I came up with in a glance. This is also a good example of what your portfolio website might have. So again, you see there's just very little text on each page, but you want to get the gist of what you did. This is the timeline. So again, UX research, then there's UX design, and then there's again development of it. So at this stage, you're trying to understand what the issues are, and then semi-structured interviews is basically you talking to the users. You can talk to students and ask them, what are the issues that you're facing? Why do you want to have a dedicated space to focus? Is there too much noise in your house or things like that? That will help you design a better solution. And then you come up with a lot of different experiences. Sorry, how might we questions? So basically, um, how might we make the room booking experience quick and efficient? So maybe students are not going to dedicated spaces just because it's such a long and difficult process to book rooms. So maybe I can think of a solution to make that better. Maybe the place where these dedicated spaces are so difficult to find that people are really confused. So how can I make that better? How can I make these dedicated spaces noise free so that students can concentrate? There can be so many aspects to the solution. So
Nishka,
again,
we
just
have two
yeah,
questions here.
yeah.
Should I read them out to you?
Oh yeah, I have them here. What are the biggest trend in the UX industry right now? So that's a good question. I might be a bit out of touch with that, but I do think that it's going a lot more towards voice user interfaces, and that is mainly because there's just so much screen fatigue with everyone constantly looking at screens. And yeah, I think voice user interfaces is going to be big. Then there's also a lot more hardware products. So think of Google Home, Echo Dot, and things like that, where you're looking at different types of hardware screens and not just computer or phone based apps. There's also gesture based systems. Then there's mixed reality, right? So trying to look at augmented reality and virtual reality. That I would say are some of the trends right now. And there'll be more research in that. Um, Divya, I'm not sure I understand how much would a typical UX design project cost. So are you talking about an academic project or an industry project? You can text back and then I can reply. Okay, so I think Utsavi had the same question. Okay, yeah. So participating in a designathon or UX based competition. So I haven't participated in a competition like that, but what a designathon is more or less a design challenge, a week-long design challenge or something like that. And this, I think, oops, I think I did that same thing again where I did not share my slides. So sorry. Okay. Do we have 10 minutes left right now?
Yeah, we do have time. We can just take this.
Okay, right. So I'm so sorry. This is the library project that I was talking about. So I don't have an example of a design competition, but this is a week-long design challenge. So if you try to compare it with another project that I just showed, this one is a lot more rough, just because I had to do it all by myself and make assumptions everywhere. Just because it was very short based versus academic projects are like, let's say, over 3 months or things like that. This was over a week. So this was the problem statement, designing an experience where dedicated spaces for students to help them focus on their academic studies. So I came up with a three-part solution, one where there's a website, then there's a calendar plugin. So this plugin will fit in onto your Outlook or your Gmail. And there's a touchscreen display outside each room for you to be able to book it right on the spot or realize if someone else has booked the room and for how long do they have the room and for what purpose or things like that. So again, this is an overview of the solution, but I just did not come up with the solution right after the problem statement. I did research. So I thought of what are the goals that people are trying to accomplish by going to a dedicated space instead of studying at home. So what might their pain points be? And then, so for example, I love going to the library, but the app to book the library room sucks. So that's something that could be improved. And these are the how might be questions I was talking about. So the room booking experience can be made better, the room usage experience can be made better, and things like that. So maybe you provide stationery in the room so that they don't have to go elsewhere to look for additional stationery. Maybe they provide a whiteboard and things like that. So sketches. So now these are, like you can see, really rough and dirty sketches. But at this stage, I talked to a UX expert and took their opinion on, do you think this solution makes sense? And only when she said that, yeah, I do think so. Yeah, this is something you can improve. Now I went on to the next stage and made wireframes. So for wireframes, I first did information architecture. This is sort of a flow chart about what all information there should be in the app. And there's a lot of information, right? Because if you're trying to book a room, you want to see what floor it is on, what is the capacity of the room, what are some of the things the room has, and things like that. So, like I said, there's problem solving, but it's sort of different from the coding kind of problem solving. Then this is a wireframe. So, this is sort of the clickable prototype I was talking about, where it does not look, it does not look finished, but everything is clickable. So this is something you would probably take to a UX engineer in color and a lot more polished. But this is what a UX designer would do. They're trying to show what the flow is. Everything is clickable, but it's done through a software called Figma. So it's not coded. But you come across, it gets the point across that this is what the interface should look like. So this is an example of all these different tasks that the user can do with the solution that I designed. And then there comes visual design. So this is something a UI designer might do. Now they're filling in the colors. Now they're making it look a lot more polished and what the actual thing would look like. Design rationale. So design rationale is something that I covered very briefly in the beginning, is something you should really have on your portfolio, is why you made the design decisions in a certain way. So for example, mentioning that my search section is scrollable and not fixed for maximum use of space. So for example, over here, this is the search section and it's scrollable, which means this area in some apps is fixed. But over here, when you scroll down, this section will go up and this list will come on the top. And that's something I decided to do because if this was always fixed here, it would end up taking almost 3/4 of my screen space. And the user would always just see the top two room names here. So that's a design decision that I made because I thought that it made more sense to have more space and a bigger list. That's just an example, but there's just a lot more and a lot bigger design decisions that go into what you finally see in the solution. And that's something that is really important to mention on your portfolio because you're not just designing to make things look artistic, you're trying to design them to solve a problem and solve the problem in the best way possible. So design decisions, explaining your design rationale is really, really important. It's necessary. And future work, so there's always going to be scope for you to make improvements, right? And that's something that you can cover briefly as well. So this was an example of something I did over a week, which is somewhat like a designathon, but not exactly. And very, very quickly, I am going to go through an aquarium project that I did. So here I won't go through the process, but just to give you an idea of what sort of different projects you can do. Um, Okay, so this is the aquarium project. We were working with Georgia Aquarium here in the US, and they had to come up with a new exhibit for sharks. And the issue is that most people hate sharks or are scared of them. And we were supposed to help design this exhibit. So this is a picture of the aquarium in a way that people find sharks fascinating or they understand that there's misconceptions about sharks, but they are so much more than, just predators. So again, we went through the entire process, did a lot of UX research, and then came up with 4 different ideas about how we can design this exhibit. And then this is a very rough prototype, a quick and dirty prototype of what we were trying to do or what the exhibit that we were designing would look like. Really, really rough prototype, but it has to be rough in the beginning because you don't want to spend too much time on ideas that might not even work. So at this stage, then we ask the users, does this idea make sense to you? And if they say yes, only then we go ahead with it and refine it. So now you see that the prototype is getting about a lot more polished. And then this is the app that we had for people to use on their phone and learn about different sharks and get information about them in a fun way. And this was a game which would be basically on a really large screen at the end of the exhibit. So imagine this is an example prototype of the screen would be even bigger in the aquarium, but this is sort of when we are very close to our solution or finished product and we're doing it at a much higher fidelity. And again, like you see, there's a mom and kid here testing our solution and telling us if it makes sense to them, if it's fun to them, things like that. So yeah, these were the three projects I had to show. I cannot show my industry projects just because most of them are always covered by a non-disclosure agreement. So that means that I cannot show the design that I have done for them. But I am willing to talk about them if you reach out to me and explain it in a bit more detail. But I think this is all I had. So thank you so much. If there's more questions, I can take them now.
Yeah, I think there are a few questions in the chat box.
Right. So, what is really special about an MS HCI degree in Georgia Tech is that it's a 2 years program. So, out of the top three programs that there are, Georgia Tech is a 2 year program, which means that there's just a lot more time for someone who's straight after out of their undergrad to explore if they want to do UX research, if they want to do UX design, maybe they want to do a PhD. 2 years is 4 semesters, which gives you enough time to explore different things and then decide what you want to do next. Versus CMU, Carnegie Mellon is a 1 year program. It's a lot more professionally focused. You don't get time to do academic research, and it's very, very hectic. I'm not saying it's a bad program at all. It's really amazing, but it might not be the best fit for you depending on what you want to get out of the degree. And that's your very own personal decision. So there's that. And Georgia Tech has really, really diverse research in a lot of HCI related areas. So you will never run out of different projects to do or different professors to work with. And that's just something for everyone there. So again, I think just it being a fine balance between being able to do academic research and being able to focus on getting a job in the industry, getting 2 years to do it. That's what I really like about the program.
Does anyone else have any more questions? You all can unmute yourself or you all can put the questions in the chat box. So I guess this is it. We don't have any more questions.
Hello.
It was sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Rajita. So I wanted to ask, like, so right now I'm a third year and I am looking forward to, do a master's in FCI. And so as a DJ sounding student, I wanted to ask you, like, is there something that I should, like in terms of say LORs, like asking it for professors, like, is that some, like, it has to be according to what the design school wants, right? And like, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So if I understand your question correctly, it's like how would you cater your application, given that you're from DJ Sangvi, what professors to ask or
Yes.
something like that? Yeah. Um, It doesn't matter. I did not know until very late that I wanted to do HCI, and there's no way to get 3 LORs from HCI research while a professors just because there's not many. And you just try to play to your strengths and have the professors vouch for whatever projects you have done. They might not be related to HCI at all, but the LOs are just trying to show that you have done great work, whatever that might be. You're a trustworthy student. You go above and beyond and things like that. In your SOP, you can write as much as you want about your passion in HCI and design and how you have gone about that and what you are planning to do in the future and things like that. So just work with what you have. You can go far beyond in personal projects and try to do whatever you can, but with whatever limitations you have, being from DJ or not having enough professors in HCI, that's okay. They are completely used to people coming in from a lot of different backgrounds. So someone who has done finance or psychology, they're not going to have someone who's going to write about HCI in their LOR, right? So that's completely okay. Just try to cover up in your SOP or in your resume or through your personal projects or portfolio.
Yes, thank you. And one more question, actually two more questions. So like when it comes to like applications and say if I want to work on more projects, is there like now how many projects should there be? Is how many internships should there be? And the application timeline, sort of in brief, if you can explain.
Yeah, I think there's just no such set formula for what will guarantee you an admission or anything like that because it's just so ambiguous and random, and it also depends year wise. Just try to do whatever you can, and try to do as many projects you can. Even in internships, I did not have a single HCI internship when I applied, but I played to my strengths and I talked about whatever I said right now that I did a lot of creative exploration in engineering, drawing, creative coding, AI, and whatnot. And then I realized HCI is the field for me. I tried to do boot camps, right? So the winter school that I attended was probably just a few weeks before I submitted my application to Georgia Tech. So just try to do whatever you can from your side. It's not a checklist. It's however much you can add to your profile to make it stronger, that's your best bet.
Yes, thank you. And could you like talk about the research part of HCI, like what kind of domains you guys worked during your time?
Yeah, so like I said, there's I worked in educational technology. So education technology is HCI doing this for how you can make educational products better. So we were working with the Children's Museum where we designed an interactive exhibit for kids to learn about bugs, so creepy crawlies, insects, but how can we do it in a fun way? So that's one domain, right? So that's a research area where you're using HCI in terms of education technology. Then there's um, human animal interaction. So how can you design devices that maybe dogs wear for their health monitoring or things like that, but in a way that it fits the dog's collar or the humans understand what vitals they are showing and things like that, or maybe sometimes they are understanding like some sort of software for the dogs for the interface to understand if the dog is happy or sad or if they're in danger or things like that. That's another example. There's ubiquitous computing. So there's a professor at Georgia Tech who's designing a tongue-based interface. So imagine like a keyboard embedded on your tongue so you can type through it or speak through it. Then there's brain computer interfaces. So a hat that you can wear, which is sort of trying to understand different signals that your brain is emitting and trying to control a computer based on that. So HCI research is very out there. Things like these take 20, 30 years to make it to the industry. So it's usually far ahead. It's a lot more creative, but at the same time, in academia, sometimes the pay is lesser and people don't like being a professor or teaching or things like that. So it's just very different in what the industry will offer versus what academia will offer.
Yes, that sounds very interesting. Thank you very much.
Anyone else who's wanting to ask a question? Okay, so I'm guessing that's it for today. Ruchita, thank you so much for taking our time from your schedule and being here with us. Um, it was like a really insightful talk for like people who are in their second and third years because we're at a stage where we're still figuring things out. and looking at
Yeah,
what interests us. So it was, and
definitely.
yeah, and I feel that HCI in itself is a very what do I call it, like a modern kind of branch because not a lot of people, it's not mainstream, right? Not a lot of people want to do it,
Yeah, yeah,
but at the same time, it's also so real and it's so practical and in touch with our lives.
yeah, yeah,
So I find that to be very interesting. So we'd
yeah,
like to
absolutely.
go
Yeah, I
ahead,
think
please.
yeah, I'm just glad that I was able to share this, and if we all got something out of it, I'm really happy because it's a very undervalued and misunderstood field a lot of times where people think the scope is very limited, but it's not. So there's just so much for everyone in HCI if you're able to get something out of this. I'm really happy. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So all the best for all your future endeavors, and we hope to like get you soon for another talk about UI
Absolutely.
very soon.
Yeah, okay. Bye.
Right. Good night. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time from your schedule and being here with us.
Thank you, everyone.